Perfect introduction to our next speaker, Wendy Ellyatt, another inspiring futurist who has done so much work to bring diverse groups together to reinforce these unitive narratives. And she's going to be talking about interbeing as it happens, and measuring what matters in a way that honours that interconnectedness and interdependence. So welcome, Wendy.
First thing I wanted to say was how I love the Nova conferences, because it's such a delight to be in a place. It's everything I'm interested in one place, and that doesn't happen very often. So I'm hugely grateful to Susan and the team for this opportunity. And it's a lovely segue, Marcella and Adam's work, into what I wanted to talk about beautifully. It could have been no better planned. But I wanted to first start with that the acknowledgement of the land where I'm working from and the lands that we are all working from, but with that recognition that really this is one land, one precious earth that we all tread on. And that when we're talking about honouring our ancestors, absolutely, I honour everybody who's come before me in my own life and lineages. But it's with that same recognition that this is one people. So one land, one people, one breath, and that sense of interbeing. So we're actually moving to a point where that recognition that there is a unitive aspect to everything we're doing, and that joy of interbeing is now becoming something that we're starting to hear in a number of different places. So I could talk about loads of different things, but I've been asked to talk on measuring and understanding human flourishing and how do we measure it, which is one of my particular interests. So I'm going to focus on that in this presentation. And interestingly, as a direct segue in from Marcella's last remark, this was one of the quotes in the Global Flourishing Conference, was that separation between the human and nature, and that we are now starting to see everybody recognize that this is a very sacred place that we have guardianship and stewardship over, and that we are not, alone in the multitude of species that exist on this beautiful planet. And these are simply things that I picked up from yesterday's talk. We're seeing worldwide people start to use the same kind of language about planetary systems and cohesion and balance and symbiosis. So we're starting to see across the globe, we're starting to see conferences and alliances and collaborations starting to use these kind of words. And what's so interesting about how things are being measured, we're starting to see, I've been involved with the Human Flourishing Programme, but we're definitely starting to see an evolution of this wonderful focus, first on well-being and then expanding it to flourishing. But we're now seeing that expand to say that this needs to move on, because there are questions that have been asked to say that the ways that we've been looking at well-being and flourishing up to now has predominantly been through this Western focus. So we've got lots of people now coming into this arena to say, well, we need to now move forward and open this up. Here are all the human-centric well-being measures and indicators, which is wonderful news, because we needed to look at what gives us lives of meaning and purpose, and what are the different aspects that nourish us. But we're seeing this move at the moment to this focus on the ecological and the relational self, and this more pluralistic perspective. And in my own work, we've been looking, the Flourish Project, that is one of my own projects, looks at the ecological self. So we're looking at the relational nature of human beings, and that there is perhaps a relational intelligence that is running throughout the universe, that is being expressed through all of us. So we're starting again to see life-centered well-being measures. I say this is quite a new area that people are getting into, but we are definitely starting to see recognition of the more than human life, and that the huge importance of understanding that we're one species among a multitude of others. And also looking at how do we measure that? How do we look at our relationship between these different areas? And one of the most important aspects of that is the contribution of ancient and indigenous perspectives. So we are beginning to see original peoples actively involved in these discussions. And what that does is it reminds us that almost some of what we're seeing is new and emergent, but so much of what we are looking at and calling for, original peoples were living their lives in accordance with those principles thousands of years ago. So actually aligning ourselves with the best of the knowledge that is already out there and recognizing the huge value of coming into collaboration with indigenous wisdom holders is part of what we're seeing happen in the world at the moment. So I was starting to think about, well, the questions that we need to look at when we're measuring human flourishing, and we want to extend it into a more evolutionary and ecological way of understanding. So this is more where we are starting to see the conversations at the moment, that we exist within an immeasurable network of relationships, that interbeing and relational intelligence, that we are dynamic colonies. And I remember reading a book, We Are Multitudes, years ago, and I found that a revelation, the sense that I was multitudes walking around, let alone that we exist within the multitudes of other species. So that the me is really a we, and our well-being has to be bound to the well-being of the larger system. And as Marcella was saying, our every intention and choice impacts the whole. And what's so extraordinary about the human species is that we are a choice-making species. We can actually override our innate kind of conditioning and programming to take decisions that in theory go against what would be best for our happiness or comfort. We can choose to do things that are surprising and unexpected, and we can choose to optimize the health and well-being of the whole over our individual well-being, which makes us very, very interesting as a species. So we are incredibly powerful co-creators, both of the present of this moment. The decision I make in this moment can change the whole parameter that I'm working in for the rest of the day or for the rest of the year. But it's also about the kind of realizing that we are the co-creators of the futures that we want to see. So as Susan said, we're seeing the call for a unitive narrative that recognizes all these things. And I was listening to some of the speeches in the conference yesterday, and what we're seeing across the world is this recognition that we desperately need new stories, that some of the stories that are being perpetuated are deeply, deeply damaging to the health and well-being of global populations, and particularly the young. So that we have a responsibility, and one of the things about conferences such as Nova is this ability to start creating the stories that we want to hear and that we want to put out about the incredibly positive work and collaborations and alliances that are going on worldwide. And I was thinking about the fact that effectively we measure what we treasure. So I made a couple of lists. So I was looking at the difference between modern civilizations and ancient / future civilizations, the difference between what we've been focusing on and what we could focusing on, and what we could measure. So there are a difference between what we have been measuring and what we could measure. And then I wanted to end with just these questions, and I will leave that for you to look at. The questions that I've been thinking about the very different ways that we need to look at how we measure human flourishing within the context of interbeing. And I will end this slide I was just ending on is the science of mattering. That whole idea that each one of us, by understanding that we individually matter in the decisions and the choices we make, we really can change the world. So yes, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Wendy. And I'm always inspired by your vision and ability to connect change makers to create these large communities of change.